With the election of a new governor this year, plans for expansion of the convention center in South Boston have been placed on hold. That means also a dramatic change of plans for an adjacent hotel and possibly the lineup for events in years to come. According to one recent report, Boston stands to lose out on some very large gatherings, not to mention revenue and parking spaces. But the potential losses are also being questioned in a policy brief from the Pioneer Institute. To talk about the brief is a longtime convention business watchdog with the Institute and more recently as a consultant for Chieppo Strategies. We'd like to welcome Charlie Chieppo. Thank you very much for being with us, Charlie.
Thank you, Chris. Pleasure.
The plan was to expand here by 65%, the biggest convention center in the East Coast north of Atlanta, a huge hotel next to it. I mean, that difference is, it's got to make a difference here, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, it will make a difference. But the thing is that the convention center claimed that over 13 years that there were 18 shows that were booked but had escape clauses saying that, this contract is based on the expansion happening. Well, we looked into that and we found that there were actually only 8 shows that had those escape clauses. Most of the ones that they're talking about simply had clauses that say, we get right of first refusal if there is more space. So I think that they have dramatically overstated the amount of business they're going to lose. If we're talking about 8 shows over 13 years, that's less than 1 show a year. More than $1 billion would be a very high price to pay for less than 1 show a year.
One of the biggest anticipated shows, Bio International. What about them? Yeah,
one of the other claims that the Convention Center Authority has been making is that in 2007 we hosted Bio and we'll never be able to do it again because they said we need more space. It's not big enough. Well, certainly we have hosted Bio again since then. And the reality is that 2007 show is the biggest show that Bio ever had. And that since then, symbolic of what's happened in the convention industry as a whole, the size of that show has shrunk by 1/3. So the Boston Convention and Exhibition Center can certainly host the Bio show going forward as it stands now. And in fact, it is booked 5 times during the decade of the 2020s, and indeed none of those contracts have these clauses that say we can move our show if you don't expand.
Now, the Boston Globe recently reported there were some big shows that were deciding not to come because of this. So what about that?
Well, as I said, they claimed there were 18. In reality, there are only 8. And like anything else, it's opportunity costs. Are we ready to spend over $1 billion to capture 8 additional shows over 13 years? I don't think that's certainly a wise move, and I think the Baker administration seems to agree.
What do you see as the ability here for growth? Because it looks as if we ought to have some growth maybe, and there would be a gain from that, but isn't there some argument to make for that?
Sure, there is, but look, the reality is that you have to look at this in context, and the context is simple. The context says that there really hasn't been any growth in the number of people coming to conventions in 30 years. And over even a shorter period than that, the amount of convention space in this country has doubled. There is an absolute glut of convention space in the United States. I don't think you can, the big players in the industry, Las Vegas, Atlanta, Chicago, have all expanded in recent years, Orlando, and there is not one of those that is doing more business after they expanded than they were before they expanded. So it just, these investments in expanding convention centers right now don't seem to have a lot of return.
The plan was also to have a very large hotel nearby. It seems logical, but you're questioning the number of people who are filling hotels.
Yeah, look, the reality is that there are 2 studies on which the building of this convention center was based. One said that it would generate 794,000 hotel room nights per year. Another said that it would generate between 612 and 697,000 hotel room nights per year. Last year, it generated about 265,000 hotel room nights. In fact, last year, the convention center actually generated 1/3 fewer room nights than the Heinz did in several years before this new, larger convention center was built. So it seems to me that no matter what angle you come at this from, this is not a winning proposition in terms of investing the money.
People at the Convention Center Authority, they say that you got to be careful about that because people are booking online now and it's hard to capture that. What about that?
People at the Convention Center Authority are looking to, they have made a very conscious decision to move away from hotel room nights as the measure of success, simply because the hotel room night numbers are so bad in Boston and everywhere else around the country.
Now, the other end of this equation here is what it costs the taxpayers. We have these dedicated revenue streams, mainly hotel revenue, that would come from hotels that are mainly affected by the convention center. One argument here is that this is going to be pretty much a kind of a self-sufficient expansion, but how do you see this?
There's a couple things to that. First of all, you did mention this big new what's called headquarters hotel next to the convention center. You have to understand that even the convention center will be the first to say that that hotel will have to be subsidized, and however many hundreds of millions of dollars that is in addition to the $1 billion expansion for the convention center. And the other thing that they're saying, I'm sorry, what were you were asking?
Well, I guess the bigger question here is do we have to worry that...
Oh, I'm sorry, the money. Yes, I'm sorry, I had a senior moment there, but it's come back to me. They're saying it'll pay for itself. Well, yes and no. It'll pay for itself. It's sort of like when government says, okay, well, we are going to, we're gonna sell bonds, 40-year bonds instead of 30-year bonds to fund whatever new thing that we're building. We're not going to pay any more this year. Well, we're not going to pay any more this year, but we're going to have to pay for a lot more years. In fact, the way it works right now is that the convention center bonds will be paid off in 2034. What they're proposing is that the money that now comes to the convention center to pay off those bonds, which could, once those bonds are paid off, go to the general fund, would continue going to the convention center for about 15 additional years. And we calculate that that would be about $5 billion over that time in foregone revenue for the Commonwealth. And
what about the possibility of taking away revenue that we might need for other things, whether it's the MBTA?
Yeah, I mean, that certainly the MBTA is the number one example of that. I mean, I think right now, certainly there would be few people out there, if you did a poll, who would say, okay, we've got $1 to spend. Would you rather spend it to expand a convention center, or would you rather spend it to fix the MBTA? I don't think there's a lot of big surprise how that would come out.
Now, the Convention Center in South Boston is where they announced that Boston was chosen by the National Committee to host the Olympics in 2024.
Yes.
There was maybe supposed to be an event at this location. Yes. It doesn't hurt to have another hotel nearby. So does this change things for the Olympics possibly, if we don't?
Well, I think that the Olympics are doing such a good job of inflicting their own wounds that I'm not sure. I mean, the reality is that they didn't even that many of the players, including Governor Baker, did not even know, were unaware of the fact that the Olympic bid was assuming an expanded convention center. So, I mean, this is just yet another way in which Boston 2024 has done a poor job of making its case and communicating.
Another factor here, a little unrelated, but still worth bringing up here. It turns out there are reports now, mainly from the Boston Herald, that former Governor Patrick got some of the money for his business trips abroad from the Convention Center Authority. I could see how this could conceivably benefit convention business. It might be money well spent, but what about...
Well, he got more than half of the money for this trust fund for these trade missions from the Convention Center Authority. And look, I'm not saying there was any kind of quid pro quo there, but I think that if you're in public life, the fact that the Patrick administration asked for this $23.7 million from the Convention Center Authority just as the expansion bill was going to arrive on the governor's desk certainly does not pass the smell test.
All right. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris.
Charlie Chieppo, and we'll have more news in just a moment.